the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Welcome back to Asleep in Class. The lights are low, the room is quiet, and there is no test waiting at the end. Tonight, the classroom opens onto the ancient world through 7 monuments that later generations remembered as wonders. A pyramid rising from the desert, a garden suspended in royal memory, a god enthroned in gold and ivory, a vast temple of Artemis, a dynastic tomb that gave its name to every mausoleum after it, a bronze sun god on an island harbor, and a lighthouse watching over the sea at Alexandria. These monuments did not belong to one empire or one century. They came from Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Anatolia, Rhodes, and Ptolemaic Alexandria. Some were built for gods, some were built for rulers, some marked victory, grief, sacred devotion, or practical navigation. Together, they show how ancient societies used stone, metal, water, light, and labor to make power visible. They also show how fragile even the grandest human works can be. Most of these wonders are gone. The Great Pyramid still stands, but the others survive through fragments, ruins, ancient descriptions, later drawings, and the stubborn human habit of naming things that should not be forgotten. As we begin, the goal is not to rank the monuments or turn them into simple tourist postcards. Each wonder opens a different doorway into ancient life: kingship, engineering, religion, trade, war, civic pride, and memory. The pace will stay calm, but the details matter. A wonder is not only a large object. It is a story about the society that built it, the people who saw it, the writers who preserved it, and the centuries that changed it into legend before the wonders became legend. The 7 wonders of the ancient world did not begin as a neutral survey of every great structure on Earth. They came from the horizon of Greek-speaking travelers and writers who moved through the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East, describing monuments that seemed to mark the outer edge of human achievement. Their world reached into Egypt, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, Greece, Rhodes, and Alexandria. It did not take in China, India, the Americas, or the many other civilizations whose monuments lay beyond that literary and travel network. The 7 wonders are therefore both a record of ancient architecture and a record of ancient perspective. What educated writers could know, what travelers could praise, and what later readers chose to remember. The familiar group eventually gathered around 7 names: the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the Statue of Zeus at Olympia, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, the Colossus of Rhodes, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Ancient authors did not preserve every version in exactly the same way, and later tradition helped settle the sequence that became famous. The number 7 already carried a sense of completeness in ancient cultures, and that helped the wonders become compact and memorable. 7 monuments could be carried in the mind more easily than a catalog of hundreds. They became a mental journey across deserts, sanctuaries, harbors, royal cities, and sacred landscapes. Their variety is part of their strength. One wonder was a pyramid built for a pharaoh in Old Kingdom Egypt. One was remembered as a garden lifted above a Mesopotamian city by terraces and waterworks. One was a seated god made from gold and ivory inside a sanctuary. One was a temple where architecture, devotion, wealth, and civic pride met. One was a tomb built for a ruler whose name still survives in the word mausoleum. One was a bronze image of Helios raised after an island city survived a siege. One was a lighthouse that turned stone, fire, and height into a signal for ships. Together, the wonders show that ancient people did not reserve awe for one kind of achievement. A tomb, a temple, a statue, a garden, a victory monument, and a working harbor tower could all become unforgettable. The evidence for them is uneven, and that unevenness matters. The Great Pyramid is still present on the Giza Plateau, altered by time, but physically undeniable. The Temple of Artemis, the Mausoleum, the Colossus, and the Lighthouse survive through ruins, fragments, ancient testimony, later reuse, and archaeological study. The statue of Zeus is gone, yet ancient descriptions preserve its maker, materials, scale, and sacred setting. The Hanging Gardens remain the most uncertain. Classical tradition placed them at Babylon, but the physical evidence there has not settled the question. Some scholars have suggested that the memory may preserve Assyrian royal garden works at Nineveh instead. The safest treatment is neither to dismiss the gardens nor to describe them as if every detail were secure. Their power lies partly in that uncertainty. One famous image also needs to be set aside before the journey begins. The Colossus of Rhodes is often pictured standing with one foot on each side of the harbor entrance, while ships pass underneath. That dramatic pose belongs to later art and legend, not to reliable ancient evidence. A statue of that size could not have been built in that position without impossible engineering problems, and ancient descriptions do not require it. The real Colossus was already extraordinary, a vast bronze monument to survival, sunlight, and civic pride, raised by a city that had endured siege and wanted victory to take visible form. That balance is the right way to approach all seven wonders. They deserve wonder without careless certainty. Some can be measured in stone. Some are known through scattered ruins. Some survive mostly in words. All of them passed through ancient admiration before they reached the modern world. By the time they became a tradition, the seven wonders were more than monuments. They were a way of thinking about what human beings could build when power, wealth, devotion, engineering, and memory were gathered into one place. The Great Pyramid of Giza. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the oldest of the seven wonders, and the only one that still stands substantially intact. It was built for Khufu, a king of Egypt's fourth dynasty, on the Giza Plateau, west of the Nile. Its original height was about 482 feet, or 147 meters, when the pyramid still carried its outer casing of fine white limestone. Today it is lower, roughly 449 feet, because the top and much of the casing are gone. Even reduced by time, it still dominates the desert edge with a shape so plain and severe that its scale can be difficult to absorb at first glance. The pyramid was not a solitary object in an empty desert. It belonged to a larger sacred and royal landscape. Nearby were other pyramids, mortuary temples, causeways, subsidiary tombs, and the vast necropolis associated with Old Kingdom kingship. The monument was built as a royal tomb, but tomb is too small a word if it is taken only as a burial place. For an Egyptian king, death was bound to cosmic order, divine rule, ritual provision, and the hope of eternal continuity. Stone architecture gave those ideas a permanent form. The Great Pyramid is made from roughly 2.3 million stone blocks. That number can sound abstract, but each block had to be quarried, shaped, transported, positioned, and joined into a structure aligned with remarkable precision. The pyramid shows not only mathematical skill, but social organization. It required administrators, surveyors, stonecutters, haulers, boatmen, food production, housing, tools, rope, timber, and disciplined labor across years. The old idea that the pyramid was simply the product of anonymous suffering misses the complexity of the state system behind it. It was an enormous coordination of people, materials, landscape, and belief. The polished casing stones once transformed the monument's appearance. Instead of the stepped roughness visible today, the pyramid would have presented smooth plains of bright limestone, shining under the Egyptian sun. The effect joined geometry with light. From a distance, the pyramid was not merely massive. It was ordered, radiant, and severe, an artificial mountain made by human hands for a king whose power was described in divine terms. Inside the pyramid, narrow passages, chambers, and relieving structures show a different kind of ambition. The internal spaces are not lavish in the way later royal tombs might be. Their force comes from precision, weight, and restraint. The king's chamber, the grand gallery, the descending and ascending passages, and the sealed character of the monument create a sense of architecture turned inward. The pyramid's meaning was not built for ordinary public circulation. It was built for death, ritual, protection, and eternity. The most striking fact about the Great Pyramid may be its survival. Writers who praised the seven wonders lived long after Khufu. The people who set the pyramid beside later monuments were already looking back across centuries. The other wonders rose, dazzled, decayed, collapsed, burned, or vanished. The pyramid endured through foreign rule, changing religions, plundered casing stones, archaeological curiosity, and modern tourism. It became older than the tradition that named it a wonder. It was already ancient when many of the other wonders were new. In that way, Giza begins the story with a challenge. Human beings built for eternity, and here, more than anywhere else in the ancient group, stone came close. The surrounding evidence also helps bring the work back down to human scale. Archaeologists have studied worker settlements, food supply, tools, ramps, quarry marks, and administrative traces around the Giza complex. Those details do not make the pyramid smaller. They make it more remarkable. The monument was not raised by magic or by a single brilliant trick. It was built through systems: measurement, taxation, provisioning, skilled labor, seasonal organization, and generations of Egyptian experience in stone construction. The pyramid is therefore a monument to Khufu, but also to the organized society capable of moving so much weight with consistency. The Great Pyramid also shaped later ways of thinking about antiquity. Greek and Roman visitors saw it as a marvel from a past already remote. Medieval travelers gave it new stories. Modern surveyors measured it, argued over it, mapped its chambers, and turned it into a subject of archaeology, tourism, and speculation. The most careful reading keeps the monument within ancient Egypt rather than making it a blank screen for modern fantasy. It belongs to royal burial, solar kingship, sacred geography, and Old Kingdom power. Its endurance is not mysterious in the cheap sense. It is mysterious in the deeper sense that a human society, working with copper tools, stone, rope, sledges, ramps, boats, and administrative discipline, made something that still commands the horizon 4,500 years later. Its placement on the plateau also bound the monument to landscape. The desert edge, the Nile Valley, the sun's path, and the surrounding tombs all contributed to its meaning. The pyramid was not only seen by later travelers as an isolated triangle against the sky. In its own world, it belonged to ceremonies, processions, offerings, and a whole architecture of royal afterlife. The more carefully it is placed back inside that world, the greater it becomes. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are the most mysterious of the 7 wonders. They are remembered as a lush, elevated garden in the heart of Mesopotamian royal power, a place where trees, vines, terraces, shade, and flowing water rose above a city of brick. Yet, unlike the Great Pyramid, the Hanging Gardens cannot be walked around or measured with confidence. No excavated structure at Babylon has settled the question beyond doubt. The gardens survive most powerfully in ancient description and later imagination. Traditional accounts placed the gardens at Babylon, the city associated with Nebuchadnezzar II and the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Babylon itself was real, monumental, and famous. It had walls, gates, temples, palaces, processional ways, and deep religious prestige. The Ishtar Gate, glazed bricks, and the sacred complex around Marduk show that Babylonian builders could create an urban environment designed to impress the eye and proclaim royal authority. A great garden in such a setting would fit the language of empire. The king gathers distant materials, commands labor, controls water, and makes abundance appear where the climate does not easily provide it. The usual description presents, in a general sense, a tiered or elevated garden supported by architecture and supplied by irrigation. Trees would need deep soil. Roots would need containment. Water would need to be raised or carried upward. The technical problem is what makes the tradition compelling. A flat garden is one thing. A garden lifted above the ground, alive with moisture and shade, turns engineering into a display of royal mastery. In Mesopotamia, where canals and irrigation shaped civilization itself, the movement of water was never merely practical. It was tied to state power, agricultural life, and the ordering of land. Modern caution is necessary. The absence of decisive evidence at Babylon has led some scholars to question whether the gardens were there at all. One influential line of argument connects the tradition with Assyrian royal gardens at Nineveh, especially under Sennacherib, whose inscriptions and palace reliefs describe waterworks, landscapes, and royal control over nature. Nineveh had impressive engineering, including canals and aqueducts, and Assyrian kings certainly used gardens as symbols of conquest and abundance. The proposal does not erase Babylon from the story, but it reminds us that ancient memory can shift names, places, and reputations over time. For narration, the safest path is to treat the Hanging Gardens as a wonder suspended between history and uncertainty. They may preserve a memory of a real royal garden. They may compress several traditions of Mesopotamian landscape engineering. They may reflect later Greek fascination with Eastern kingship and the marvel of water rising into greenery. Their uncertainty is not a weakness in the story. It is the point. Among the 7 wonders, the gardens are the one that feels least like stone and most like a rumor carried through dry air. The central picture remains powerful: a city of baked brick, royal walls, and temple towers, with a garden climbing above it. Water moves upward by human design. Shade appears where power commands it. Plants from different regions grow together, as if empire itself has been planted in terraces. Whether the monument stood in Babylon, Nineveh, or in a memory shaped from both, the Hanging Gardens reveal an ancient dream of abundance. The wonder was not only that a garden existed. The wonder was that nature could be staged as architecture, and architecture could be made to breathe. Royal gardens were not decorative afterthoughts in Mesopotamia. Kings used them to display order, fertility, conquest, and access to distant lands. Trees could represent regions brought under power. Exotic plants could show that the ruler's reach extended beyond the immediate plain. Waterworks could transform the environment and make visible the king's ability to command labor and technique. In Assyrian palace reliefs and inscriptions, gardens, canals, and planted landscapes belong to the same language as walls, armies, and tribute. They say that the ruler can gather the world into one controlled space. That context makes the Hanging Gardens believable as an idea, even when the exact monument remains uncertain. A terraced garden would require waterproofing, drainage, heavy structural support, soil depth, constant water supply, and maintenance. It would also require a staff of workers who kept the planted world alive day after day. If the wonder existed in the form ancient tradition describes, it was never simply a romantic gift or a pleasant rooftop. It was a machine of life, masonry carrying earth, water lifted against gravity, roots held above the ground, and shade engineered into a city of sun-baked brick. The uncertainty can be handled with without flattening the story. The most honest version does not say, with false confidence, that visitors can point to a particular surviving foundation and know the garden stood there. It says that ancient writers preserved the memory of an astonishing royal garden, that Babylon's reputation made it the traditional home of the story, and that Assyrian evidence has opened another possible path. The wonder then becomes a lesson in how ancient fame travels. Sometimes the memory of a monument survives more vividly than the monument itself. The statue of Zeus at Olympia. The statue of Zeus at Olympia belonged to a sacred landscape rather than a royal tomb or imperial city. Olympia, in the western Peloponnese, was one of the great sanctuaries of the Greek world. It was associated with sacrifice, athletic competition, oath-taking, and the Olympic Games held in honor of Zeus. People came from different Greek cities to compete, watch, worship, negotiate, and remember that they shared certain gods and stories, even when their cities fought one another. Inside the Temple of Zeus stood the statue that later entered the Seven Wonders. It was created by Phidias, the sculptor also associated with the great works of classical Athens. The statue was nearly 40 feet high, about 12 meters, and showed Zeus seated on a throne. It was made in the chryselephantine technique, using gold and ivory over a wooden framework. The skin of the god was rendered in ivory. Drapery and ornament gleamed with gold. The throne was described as richly decorated with materials such as ebony, ivory, precious stones, and gold. Ancient descriptions give Zeus the symbols of rule and victory. In one hand he held Nike, the personification of victory. In the other, he held a scepter topped by an eagle. The seated pose mattered. Zeus did not need to stride or act. His authority came from stillness, scale, and presence. The temple around him became a frame for divine kingship. Visitors entering the sacred space encountered not a distant myth, but the god brought close through material splendor and artistic control. The statue's power also came from Olympia itself. The games were not simply athletic entertainment. They were bound to religious practice, sacrifice, prestige, and the honor of cities and individuals. Victors could become famous across the Greek world. Oaths were sworn. Offerings were made. The sanctuary held treasuries, altars, monuments, and memories accumulated over generations. The statue of Zeus stood at the center of that atmosphere, gathering the authority of the god and the fame of the sanctuary into one overwhelming object. Nothing of the statue survives as a complete work. That loss changes the way the wonder must be approached. Unlike the Great Pyramid, it cannot be measured in the open air. Unlike the Temple of Artemis or the Mausoleum, it did not leave a ruin that can easily suggest its full mass. It survives through ancient testimony, coins, later artistic echoes, and the reputation of Phidias. Yet that reputation was enough. Ancient writers remembered the statue as one of the highest achievements of sacred art, a work whose beauty and scale seemed to make divinity visible. The statue of Zeus shows that wonder did not always mean engineering in the modern sense. It could mean the successful concentration of religious feeling into an image. Gold, ivory, cedarwood, ritual, and architecture worked together. A visitor did not need to believe that the materials were supernatural. The effect came from the meeting of craftsmanship and worship. In a world where gods were honored with offerings, temples, festivals, and images, the statue at Olympia became a form of presence. It was an artwork, but it was also a threshold between human ceremony and divine authority. The chryselephantine method itself carried meaning. Ivory was rare, expensive, and associated with smooth living flesh. Gold caught light and announced divine splendor. A wooden core supported the figure, but the visible surface belonged to precious materials gathered through trade, wealth, and skilled craft. The statue would have required constant care. Ivory could crack in dry conditions. Gold surfaces needed maintenance. A sacred image of this kind was not an inert museum object. It lived within ritual space and depended on priests, attendants, offerings, and the continuity of worship. The Temple of Zeus also framed the statue through architecture. A colossal seated figure inside a temple changes the proportions of the room around it. Ancient descriptions suggest that Zeus seemed almost too large for the building, as if rising would break through the roof. Whether that was exact observation or literary emphasis, it captures the intended effect. The god was contained and uncontainable at the same time. The worshipper stood before an image that belonged to human craftsmanship, yet was designed to exceed ordinary human scale. Olympia gave the statue a public audience, unlike many local cult images. Athletes, envoys, spectators, trainers, priests, and visitors moved through the sanctuary during festival periods. They saw dedications from different cities and memorials of victories past. The statue of Zeus stood among these layers of competition and devotion. It reminded the Greek world that athletic glory unfolded beneath divine authority. The wonder was therefore not only a masterpiece by Phidias. It was the visual center of a sanctuary where bodies competed, cities displayed pride, and Zeus received honor as the highest witness. There's also a quiet contrast between athletic motion and the stillness of Zeus. Outside, runners, wrestlers, charioteers, and spectators filled the festival with movement, dust, shouting, and risk. Inside the temple, the god sat unmoving, holding victory itself in his hand. That contrast gave the sanctuary a powerful rhythm. Humans striving outside, divine order within. The statue gathered all that movement back into a single seated form. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus stood in western Anatolia, in a city connected to trade, pilgrimage, Greek culture, local traditions, and the movement of people across the Aegean world. Ephesus was not a quiet village around a single sacred building. It was a major urban place with commercial life, political changes, and religious importance. The great temple gave the city a sacred center that drew wealth, attention, offerings, and memory. The temple was dedicated to Artemis, though the Artemis of Ephesus carried local forms and meanings that were not identical to every Greek image of the goddess. Sanctuaries often blended older local worship with wider Greek names and stories. That mixture gave Ephesus a religious identity that reached beyond the city while remaining tied to the land around it. Pilgrims and visitors encountered a deity whose prestige belonged both to local devotion and to the broader Greek-speaking world. One major phase of the temple was built around 550 BCE and is associated with Croesus, king of Lydia, a ruler famous for wealth. The building was enormous. Britannica gives its dimensions at more than 350 by 180 feet, about 110 by 55 meters. Those numbers matter because Greek temples were not only shelters for cult statues. They were ordered displays of columns, proportion, stone, approach, and ritual space. The Temple of Artemis turned sacred architecture into a monument that could stand beside royal tombs and pyramids in ancient memory. The temple story also includes destruction and rebuilding. In 356 BCE, it was famously burned by Herostratus, whose act became associated with the desire for notoriety. Later rebuilding restored the sanctuary on a grand scale. That pattern is important. The wonder was not one frozen object existing outside time. It was a sacred place, repeatedly damaged, renewed, and remembered. Each rebuilding added another layer to its fame. Ephesus did not simply possess a temple, it possessed a story of loss and return. A great sanctuary like this also functioned within the economy and society of a city. Temples could hold dedications, art, wealth, and records. They could attract visitors and help define civic pride. Offerings connected private devotion to public display. The architecture itself created a rhythm of movement: approach, columns, threshold, sacred enclosure, and the awareness of a divine presence within. The Temple of Artemis expressed religious devotion, but it also made Ephesus visible to the wider world. The later history of the temple was harsh. Ancient sanctuaries could decline through fire, invasion, changing rule, shifting religious practice, and the reuse of materials. Today, the site does not preserve the temple as ancient visitors saw it. The scale must be reconstructed from archaeology, texts, and comparison. Still, even in ruin, the Temple of Artemis remains one of the clearest examples of sacred architecture becoming a wonder. It was not remembered only for height or cost. It was remembered because a city, a goddess, a sanctuary, and a long tradition of rebuilding became joined in stone. The temple's scale would have shaped the experience of approach. Long before a visitor reached the sacred interior, the forest of columns declared wealth and order. Columned architecture can seem familiar now because later buildings borrowed its language so widely. But in its own setting, a colossal temple carried a physical force that photographs and plans can barely convey. It organized light and shade. It made the human body feel small. It turned repeated vertical stone into rhythm, and that rhythm guided attention toward the goddess and the prestige of the city. Ephesus also sat in a region where cultures met. Lydian, Persian, Greek, Anatolian, and later Roman histories all touched the city. The Temple of Artemis belonged to this layered world. Croesus's association with the earlier monumental temple connects it to royal wealth from Lydia. The later rebuilding after the fire connects it to civic determination and Hellenistic ambition. Over time, the sanctuary became a place where religion, economics, identity, and politics reinforced one another. Gifts to Artemis were also gifts seen by people. Sacred wealth became public memory. The famous burning by Herostratus should not take over the section, but it reveals something sharp about fame. Ancient tradition says he destroyed the temple to make his name remembered. The response was to condemn his name, yet the story preserved it anyway. Against that act of destruction stands the more important fact of rebuilding. Ephesus answered loss with another temple. The wonder then was not merely the structure that burned. It was the city's insistence that the sanctuary would continue, that Artemis would remain central, and that sacred architecture could be restored after violence. The temple also reminds us that ancient wonders were not always secular achievements. Modern viewers may focus on size, columns, and engineering, but ancient visitors approached a sacred place with expectations of protection, gratitude, fear, and obligation. The beauty of the building served devotion. Its wealth was not only display, it was part of a relationship between the city, the goddess, and those who came seeking favor or giving thanks. Mausoleum at Halicarnassus. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus was a monument to death, but not a modest one. It was built for Mausolus, ruler of Caria in southwestern Asia Minor, after his death in the 4th century BCE. Halicarnassus, on the coast of what is now Turkey, stood within a region shaped by Anatolian, Greek, Persian, and local influences. Mausolus ruled as a dynast under the Persian Empire, but he also used Greek language, art, and architecture to express power. His tomb became one of the clearest examples of cultural mixture turned into monument. The building was associated especially with Artemisia II, his sister and widow, who ruled after him, and was remembered in connection with the tomb's construction. Ancient tradition presents the mausoleum as an act of dynastic honor and grief, though grief and politics were not separate in a royal monument. To build a tomb on such a scale was to announce that the dead ruler's memory would remain active. The structure said that Mausolus had belonged among kings, generals, cities, and gods of public remembrance. The monument was built around 353 to 351 BCE. Ancient sources and later summaries associate it with Greek architects Pythias and Satyros. Sculptors from the Greek world were said to have contributed to its decoration. The exact appearance has to be reconstructed from fragments, descriptions, and scholarship, but the general impression is of a high, elaborate structure combining a tomb chamber, colonnaded architecture, sculptural decoration, and a pyramidal roof crowned by a chariot group. It was not simply a grave. It was a vertical statement of rank. The mausoleum also changed language. The name of Mausolus became the word mausoleum, now used for grand tombs in general. That afterlife is one of the wonder's most remarkable achievements. Many rulers built tombs. Few gave their names to a whole category of architecture. The word carries the memory of Halicarnassus, even when people using it know nothing of Caria, Artemisia, or the original monument. The tomb's fame came partly from how it joined different traditions. A Greek-style colonnade could meet Anatolian dynastic ambition. Sculptural programs could show conflict, movement, and mythic association. The elevated form separated the ruler from ordinary burial. In the ancient world, memory often needed a place, and the mausoleum made memory into a civic landmark. It was meant to be seen from outside, approached by the living, and understood as a declaration that death had not ended royal presence. Earthquakes and time eventually destroyed much of the structure. Stones were reused, fragments dispersed, and the ancient building disappeared as a complete monument. Yet the mausoleum's survival in language gives it a different kind of endurance from the pyramid. Giza remained in stone. Halicarnassus remained in a word. The wonder teaches that architecture can outlive itself not only through ruins, but through names. Mausolus is gone, Artemisia is gone, and the tomb is gone as a standing building. Still, every later mausoleum repeats the memory of that Carian ruler, whose tomb was made large enough to enter the seven wonders. Mausolus was not a ruler of the largest empire in the ancient world, but he understood the political language of monumental building. As a Carian dynast under Persian overlordship, he occupied a position between worlds. He shifted the capital to Halicarnassus, strengthened the city, and used Greek cultural forms without becoming simply Greek. The mausoleum reflects that in-between power. It was local and international, dynastic and artistic, funerary and political. Its fame came from how successfully it turned a regional ruler into a figure of Mediterranean memory. The sculptural decoration mattered because it made the tomb active to the eye. Reliefs and statues could connect Mausolus with mythic conflict, heroic energy, and noble display. A tomb that only enclosed a body would have been private. A sculpted monument rising above the city made death public. It asked viewers to read the dead ruler as someone still worthy of attention. The architecture did what royal monuments often do. It tried to defeat disappearance by giving grief a permanent address. Artemisia's role gives the story emotional force, though the monument should not be reduced to romance. She was a ruler in her own right after Mausolus's death, and the tomb expressed continuity as much as mourning. In dynastic politics, memory could stabilize authority. To honor the dead ruler was also to strengthen the house that survived him. The wonder stands at the meeting point of affection, legitimacy, artistic ambition, and statecraft. That mixture explains why a tomb in Halicarnassus could compete in memory with pyramids, temples, statues, and towers. Its later destruction did not erase the ambition behind it. Medieval builders reused stones from ancient monuments because ruins were also quarries, and practical need often outweighed antiquarian respect. That reuse is part of the history of the wonders. Ancient masterpieces did not simply vanish in one dramatic moment. They were weathered, shaken, dismantled, repurposed, misunderstood, and absorbed into later cities. Halicarnassus survived as scattered material and as a word. The Colossus of Rhodes. The Colossus of Rhodes was a victory monument in bronze. It stood on the island of Rhodes, a maritime power in the eastern Mediterranean, after the city survived a major siege by Demetrius Ipolyrcetes. Demetrius was one of the powerful successors who fought over the world left by Alexander the Great. His nickname, Polyrcetes, means the besieger, and his campaigns were associated with enormous siege engines and the brutal theater of Hellenistic warfare. Rhodes endured, and the city turned survival into a monument. The statue represented Helios, the sun god, who held special importance for Rhodes. It was made by Chars of Lindos and was traditionally described as about 70 cubits high, around 105 feet or 32 meters. That height made it one of the most spectacular bronze statues of the ancient world. Bronze on that scale required technical skill, money, planning, and civic confidence. The monument was not private devotion. It was a public statement that the island had resisted conquest and placed its victory under the sign of the sun. A later image has often distorted the Colossus, the giant standing with one foot on either side of the harbor entrance while ships pass beneath. That picture is powerful, but it is not historically secure and is generally treated as impossible. The statue did not need to straddle the harbor to be impressive. Standing near the harbor, or in a prominent place connected to Rhodes, it would still have joined sea, city, god, and victory. The false version may have endured because it gives the mind a simple symbol, a giant body turned into a gate. The real monument was already grand without that pose. The Colossus did not stand for long. An earthquake toppled it around 225 or 226 BCE, only decades after its completion. Ancient accounts describe its fallen remains as remarkable even after collapse. That detail is telling. A wonder could continue to inspire awe as a ruin. Broken bronze limbs and fragments of a giant god still carried the memory of scale. The statue's physical life was short compared with the Great Pyramid, but its imaginative life was enormous. Rhodes itself gives the monument deeper meaning. The island sat at the crossing of maritime routes and belonged to a world of trade, diplomacy, naval power, and shifting Hellenistic alliances. A statue of Helios after a siege was not only religious gratitude, it was civic branding in the ancient sense. Rhodes survived, Rhodes prospered, Rhodes stood beneath the sun. The Colossus became the body of that message. The wonder also shows how memory changes monuments. Many people today picture the impossible harbor-straddling Colossus before they learn anything about Demetrius, Chars, Helios, or the earthquake. The legend has almost overshadowed the historical statue. A careful version of the story can keep both facts in view: the actual bronze figure made by Rhodian victory and the later dream of a giant over the sea. One belongs to ancient Rhodes. The other belongs to the long history of how ruins become symbols. The siege that preceded the Colossus was not a minor local quarrel. In the generation after Alexander, his successors struggled over territory, prestige, and alliances. Rhodes was valuable because of its harbor, fleet, wealth, and strategic position. Its resistance to Demetrius gave the city a story of collective endurance. According to tradition, abandoned siege equipment helped fund the statue. That detail, whether simplified by later memory or not, captures the symbolism perfectly. The machinery of attempted conquest was transformed into a monument of survival. Bronze sculpture on this scale demanded a different kind of technical imagination from stone architecture. Large bronze statues were usually made in sections, supported by internal frameworks, and assembled with careful attention to weight and balance. A figure of Helios more than 100 feet high would have required decisions about stance, support, surface, and visibility from a distance. It was a feat of metallurgy as well as civic pride. Sunlight on bronze would have given the god a living brilliance, especially in a harbor city where sea and sky changed constantly around it. The earthquake that brought the Colossus down also shaped its fame. Some monuments become wonders because they last. Others become wonders because even their destruction becomes memorable. A fallen giant can be more haunting than an intact statue. Ancient viewers who saw pieces of the Colossus may have felt the scale more strongly from the fragments than from the standing figure. A hand, arm, leg, or shattered mass of bronze could make the absent whole feel larger. Rhodes lost the statue, but the story became harder to erase after the fall. Helios was an especially fitting god for this kind of civic message. The sun rises over the sea, crosses every boundary, and makes the harbor visible. For an island community, a solar guardian joined religion with geography. The Colossus did not need to block the harbor entrance to command it symbolically. Its presence linked Rhodes to brightness, endurance, and the open water on which the city depended. The Lighthouse of Alexandria. The Lighthouse of Alexandria stood on the island of Pharos, at the harbor of Alexandria in Egypt. It was one of the last of the 7 wonders to be built, and one of the most practical. A pyramid preserved royal death. A temple honored a goddess. A statue made a god present. A mausoleum monumentalized a ruler. The lighthouse guided ships. It turned architecture into a signal across dangerous water. Alexandria was founded by Alexander the Great and became the capital of the Ptolemaic kingdom. It was a city of harbors, palaces, Greek and Egyptian traditions, scholarship, trade, and royal display. Ships entered from across the Mediterranean, bringing grain, goods, officials, soldiers, travelers, and texts. In such a city, a lighthouse was more than a useful tower. It announced that Alexandria was a center of movement and knowledge, a place where sea routes gathered, and where royal power organized the edge between land and water. The lighthouse, or Pharos, was said to have stood more than 350 feet about 110 meters high. Ancient and later descriptions vary, but the basic point is clear. It was among the tallest human-made structures of its age after the pyramids. Its form is usually reconstructed as a multi-tiered tower rising from a broad base, with upper levels and a fire or light at the top. Traditions about mirrors or reflective devices should be treated cautiously, but the essential function is secure. Tower helped ships find Alexandria's harbor, especially across distance, haze, darkness, and dangerous approaches. The word Pharos itself became associated with lighthouses in later languages, another sign of the monument's influence. Like the Mausoleum, it entered ordinary speech by becoming more than a single structure. To name a lighthouse after Pharos was to carry Alexandria's harbor into other coastlines and centuries. The tower's fame traveled with sailors, writers, engineers, and empires. The lighthouse also gives the Seven Wonders a different ending from a simple story of vanished luxury. It was beautiful and royal, but it performed a public task. Its light existed for ships that needed direction. Its height was not only display, it extended visibility. Its position linked stone to sea, fire to navigation, and empire to movement. Alexandria's greatness depended on circulation. Goods, people, grain fleets, manuscripts, officials, and ideas. The Pharos made that circulation safer and more legible. Earthquakes damaged the lighthouse over time, and the standing ancient tower eventually disappeared. In the 15th century, Sultan Qaitbay built a fort at or near the site, traditionally using stone from the ruined structure. That later fort gives the location another layer of memory. A lighthouse became a ruin. A ruin became a fortress. A fortress became a marker of where the ancient wonder once watched the sea. The Pharos closes the circuit of the Seven Wonders with light over water, a signal from the ancient world that still reaches later memory, even after the tower itself is gone. The choice of Pharos was strategic. Alexandria's harbor was one of the great maritime gateways of the Hellenistic world, but coastlines can be dangerous, even near powerful cities. Reefs, shoals, night, weather, and the confusion of approaching land made navigation uncertain. A high tower with a visible fire turned royal architecture into practical protection. It helped merchants, sailors, officials, and travelers recognize the harbor and enter the city's orbit. The lighthouse made Ptolemaic power useful at the very moment a ship needed guidance. The Pharos also belonged to Alexandria's broader identity. This was the city of the famous library and Mausoleum, of royal palaces, scholarly ambition, Greek rule in Egypt, and trade across the Mediterranean. The lighthouse stood at the edge of that world like a vertical announcement. It told approaching ships that this was not an ordinary port. It was a capital of kings and knowledge, a place where wealth, grain, texts, soldiers, artists, and officials crossed paths. Its function was navigation, but its message was civilization organized at the scale of the sea. Ancient descriptions of the lighthouse's height and appearance vary, and later writers sometimes amplified its marvels. The mirror tradition is especially worth treating with care. Reflective devices may have been part of later stories, but the safest emphasis stays on the tower, fire, height, harbor, and reputation. What matters is that the Pharos became the model of a lighthouse in cultural memory. It joined usefulness with grandeur so completely that later languages carried its name outward. A tower built for Alexandria became a word for guiding light. The lighthouse also stands apart because its wonder was renewed every night. A tomb or temple could impress in daylight, but the Pharos reached its fullest purpose when darkness made the coast uncertain. Its fire turned night into a navigable field. For sailors, that light was not abstract grandeur. It meant orientation, harbor, safety, and arrival. In that sense, the Pharos was a monument that acted upon the world again and again. When wonders become memory. Of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, only the Great Pyramid of Giza still stands in a form close enough to confront directly. The others have changed into fragments, ruins, descriptions, arguments, reconstructions, names, and inherited images. The hanging gardens remain uncertain. The statue of Zeus is lost. The Temple of Artemis survives only in traces of a sanctuary that was once immense. The Mausoleum at Halicarnassus gave its ruler's name to later tombs. The Colossus fell, then rose again in legend. The Lighthouse of Alexandria became a word for lights over the sea. Together, the wonders show how ancient people marked the limits of ordinary scale. They honored kings, gods, cities, victories, grief, gardens, and harbors. They joined beauty with labor and ambition with loss. Their builders tried to make power visible, but time chose different endings for each monument. Stone endured at Giza. Bronze collapsed at Rhodes. Sacred images vanished. A garden slipped into debate. A tower became a memory beneath a fortress. That may be why the 7 wonders still hold attention. They are not only monuments. They are reminders that civilization is built from things that can disappear and still remain powerful. If you are still awake, more quiet journeys through the ancient world will be waiting here. And if you are drifting now, let the pyramid, the vanished gardens, the seated god, the broken bronze, the sacred columns, the royal tomb, and the harbor light fade into one quiet memory while you are falling asleep in class.